Hello and welcome to the Dinis Guarda YouTube podcast series. Once again, profiling people that change the world, empowered by openbusinesscouncil.org, citysabc.com, and fashionabc.org, and in soon sportsabc.org. So we come here again to talk about ideas, talk about people first, and special people that have passion for what they do, people that create, people that think, people that write, people that draw, and as well people that work in business, technology, and all the bridges of our modern world that is always complex but beautiful, and especially creating narratives. One of the things we try to do here is how we can create better narratives that can actually help us understand the challenges and as well to understand a bit better how to learn and to take on this. And I think one of the things we try always to do is bring people that are out of the box and people that actually have their creativity and their actually energy to do more than just talk, but do action and do action multiple things. So I want to start with some thoughts I've been actually thinking, and I think especially for my special guest for today makes sense because it's um, about creativity, but as well how we build bridges between ourselves and the different things. So I have a couple of words that I want just to talk. Is actually one. It's actually a study I've been doing from William Gibson that I want to talk today, especially for today, for what we're going to do is our present is a volatile volcano rupture where we engineer new islands of time in the converging archipelago of the future. So I think for coming to the our special guest today, so I'm particularly interested and passionate because she is into education, she is into drawing, and she has been making this in her own special way. In a discreet, I hope that her audience becomes bigger because she has fantastic things, and I love what she does with her creativity. So I welcome to our series Nicki Hambleton. Nicole is a creator, Apple Distinguished Educator, and founder of NiH Consultancy. She's based out of Singapore, and she's been working in decades of experience and as well looking at how to teach in different parts of the world, from the UK to Singapore. And she's an expert in integrating technology and art authentically in the classroom and using those for visual notes and taking. And one of the things we're going to be talking is about her fantastic infographics and the different parts she does to create narratives about education. And she's a trained cognitive coach and a consultant in visual arts, visual thinking, and learning strategies, which I think is important for everyone listening to us because the complexity of our world, we need to cut it in pieces and work on this. And one of the things she does is just she teaches sketchnotes to students and adults through dedicated workshops and presentations, and has authored a collaborative ebook on the process of taking notes digitally with other educators. Nicki has a co-ETAL graduate certificate and is an alumnus of the University of Exeter's Master in Education, Technology and Creativity and Thinking online course. And their thesis and recent work focus on the significance of incorporating visual and spatial methodologies for retrieval and the effects on long-term memory. And Nicki is highly experienced on these areas, but especially she's been working with United World College Southeast Asia International School, and she's as well in the head. She's the head of high school visual art, and she will talk about this as well. And she established her consultancy where she helps organizations and clients bring ideas to life. And one of the concepts that we're going to be talking as well is her blog, Thinking Digitally, which is a wonderful concept, difficult to spell, and where highlights the process of merging text and images. So welcome to our series. It's a pleasure to have you here, Nicki.
Thank you, Dinis. Gosh, what a big introduction that was.
It's wonderful.
It's quite interesting hearing everything about yourself, isn't it?
No, it's wonderful. So I think one of the things that is wonderful about your work is really how you combine highly complex themes or technology concepts, and then you make it in simple infographics that are very beautiful, like sustainability, education, innovation, and a lot of different things. And what I like as well is that this is kind of quite beautiful and quite complex, but very simple at the same time. And I think a lot of people especially when you go to school and education, one of the challenges is really how to make children adapt to this digital world, especially where AI right now starts to become or is going to make a lot of changes in the way we educate, the way we teach, but as well for business and organizations worldwide. Visual thinking can make a big difference. There's a lot of people that cannot read books. I think people always blame that people are lazy, but no, people cannot read books, partly because they were not educated for that. But reading a book is a task that is difficult. So I want to touch about these things, but let's start by yourself and your background. So how do you end up doing this, and a bit of your passions and background as well?
Sure. Thank you, Dinis. I suppose I've always had a huge love for art. It's always been a part of my life as far as I can remember, and in particular drawing. I remember my father encouraging me to draw when I was really quite young, and I would just get involved in anything creative, making things, copying cartoons and all sorts. And I was lucky because I grew up in Surrey, not far out of London, so I had access to a huge amount of galleries and exhibitions, just a short train journey away. But if I'm honest with you, like art was just all I ever wanted to do. It kind of allowed me to switch off from the world and become completely immersed in the process. And so in some ways, drawing is like a meditation, a sort of a therapy. It calms me and grounds me and makes me happy. And I just don't think about anything else when I'm drawing. And that's quite interesting because I've always been, a pretty deep thinker, a problem solver, a sort of an ideas generator. But I always wanted to do graphic design. And so I applied to the degree course in Manchester, Design for Communication Media. And that's where I met my husband in my final year. So it was obviously meant to be. And then I worked for a pretty small design company there, small graphic design company. But then the recession it hit the UK, and I was made redundant. So what would I do next? So somebody suggested that I looked into teaching, and it hadn't really occurred to me before. I'd always thought fondly about, I had a summer in Camp America where I was working with youngsters on a summer camp. And so I applied to a PGCE course teaching art. And it was there and then that teaching and the students just captured my heart. And I realized that that's what I'm put on earth to do. And I've been doing it ever since for 31 years. Dennis, it's quite rare to find a job that you absolutely love and have enjoyed every single day. And I just feel so lucky and privileged to have met so many unique and inspiring people along the way. So that's a little bit of background as to how I went from this quiet, drawing child to the teacher that I am today.
Wonderful, a beautiful story as well. And for instance, from this part of drawing to then becoming creating a professional life on design and visual thinking, how did the career evolve? Because it's what I love about your work is that it's very simple, but at the same time very profound, and as well something that can reach a lot of different perceptions. And I'm sure, of course, there was the techniques that you start working and the process of creating illustrations mixed with infographics and visual thinking. So how did that came into the process between your education and when you start
Yeah.
educating and working in agencies and your consultancy?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I taught in the UK for 14 years, and then we sort of had a bit of a pull to Italy. My husband's also a teacher; he teaches physics, and so we moved the whole family to Italy. And that was when we got introduced to the international school life. And from Italy, we then went to Ghana in West Africa and then on to Singapore. And I think if I look back and reflect on my time as a teacher, I would say that United World College was the trigger point, the catalyst, the time that I changed as a teacher, as an artist, and as a person. And I think it was because technology, around about sort of 10 years ago, suddenly became a massive part of our life, and also in the classroom. And I remember that I was experimenting with things, technology and art, and, where before it had always been so traditional, drawing, painting, sculpture. And it felt like being a kid again, playing with technology. And so I kept sort of thinking of different things that I could do and how I could share that enthusiasm with my students. And it was, I'd say maybe it was around about 2012 that I connected with some other colleagues at our school who were digital learning coaches. And I'd been sort of exploring, doing some sort of visual notes and things. But when I was given an iPad to play on, I just couldn't believe how amazing it was. It was like this magic tablet of fun. And I found it so liberating to be able to make notes, to draw, to be able to erase, cut and move things. We never had undo function with paper and pen or paint before. And being a bit of a perfectionist, that was pretty helpful. So I guess then my sketch notes, that sometimes they're known as sketch notes, visual notes, were partially in a notebook. I really like to still use pen and paper, mostly for my ongoing day-to-day planning and notes. And then I'll use the iPad and an app called Procreate to do my more finished notes and designs that I share a bit more publicly. And I guess it was partly to do with that I was starting to become known as, the sketchnoter. And somebody suggested that I apply to become an Apple Distinguished Educator. And this is a community of incredible educators all around the world who are using, innovative ways to integrate technology into learning. And I think it was that point that this kind of was like a new phase in my creative journey. And I started presenting about the power of visuals through sketch notes. And I started animating text as part of the presentations to then share my story with Apple Institutes and also at education conferences. And alongside with that, people were like, how did you do that? I want to learn how to do that. So then I started to run workshops on visual note-taking as well. So that's a little bit of a background of how I changed, I guess, from being this traditional, passionate about drawing to passionate about drawing still, but with a digital element to it.
Wonderful. So can you tell us about the Apple Distinguished Educator? I think that's a concept that is not so well known. I think Apple doesn't promote it very often. And I use a lot iPad to draw, and actually probably right now, because I'm between different techniques, I would like for you to tell a bit how you work that process, because I think it's really, first of all, it's really magic, like you said, because I feel the same when I draw on the iPad. But I think for people listening to us, and I think one of the challenges I find, especially for young people in universities, is that they really don't understand the possibilities that exist with these technologies. They all use the technologies, but they don't understand that you can actually create a career, and you actually can get into a network of professionals around the world and create a lot of new, I would say, new ways of creating a lifestyle, but as well a new way of creating or being part of a community.
Mm. Well, the Apple Distinguished Educator, or ADEs as we're known, is it's all around the world. In fact, you have to apply as a teacher. You have to apply to become part of the particular cohort of that year. So I applied in 2013, and from there you attend an Apple conference, or an institute as they call them, and that's where you get to meet with different ADs from your local region. So where I am in Singapore, it would be the APAC region. And then every 2 years, give or take a pandemic or two, you would have a global conference where that was just so incredible and mind-blowing for me. You'd meet these people who you'd seen their names on Twitter or wherever, and you'd meet them and they would present or share their thinking. You'd be in little workshops together. It was just wonderful. And I was very, very lucky that one year, again, through my lovely colleagues who are so supportive of me, they suggested that I put in to do what they call an Apple talk. And so I put together a series of slides, again, to sort of tell my story. And these talks are like 3 minutes long, so you have to be quite succinct. But I would still try to use my visuals to help narrate that story. So there's kind of two sides to my visual thinking. So there's the visual thinking that I do for myself. So if I'm creating a visual note because I want to capture the thinking and the knowledge and the information that came across, whether it's in a podcast or a webinar or a book that I might have been reading, or even at a meeting or conference that I was at. So those are the sketch notes, the visual notes that I started making some time ago. So one that I did fairly recently, and I shared it on LinkedIn, there's a couple of authors who have written an amazing book called Becoming a Totally Inclusive School. And they were on a webinar. And so I asked if I could make a visual note for two reasons, really. It was partially to share it with the authors, but also for me to capture the thinking and to put it in a way that I could navigate it more clearly, let's say. And so I was listening to the points and I would scribble down notes and things in my notebook. And then after, I would try to think, what's the big idea? What are they trying to get across through this book or through this webinar? So I would think about a big sort of background image or some kind of visual metaphor to capture that idea. And so for this particular book, another thing that I try to do, I try to organize the information or use quotes that people have said so that I don't give everything away. You can't put everything on a visual note. It would just be cognitive overload. So I try to use a limited amount of key information and then a limited palette. So again, so colors don't sort of jump out too much and confuse the reader. So that was one that I did fairly recently. And then one, I don't know if you're interested in one that I'm currently working on. I'm just this last week, I've been working on a sketch note called Confessions of an Introvert for a podcast that I'm hosting. Now, I kind of giggle a little bit when I say that because it does sound like a confession when you say, "Hi, I'm Nicki, I'm an introvert." And I always laugh about it, as some people question whether I am. But I just wanted to explore the kind of trials and tribulations that the introverts face every day and share different stories from a range of people. Students, adults, celebrities, maybe anybody that has experienced situations and can kind of join me to discuss how to navigate the world as an introvert or an extrovert. And so again, I was trying to think, how would I present this information? So because I always think about it as a day in the life of an introvert, so that kind of gave me the idea of a comic strip or sort of like a graphic novel structure to communicate the everyday struggles or successes or things that are brilliant about being an introvert. It may become a series. It depends how I get on with it. It's taken quite a long time, because as I said before, as a perfectionist, I want everything to be right. But and also it's important to me, putting a piece of your soul, your heart, like who you are, is a bit of vulnerability there. So the perfectionist on my shoulder is saying, get this right. But yeah, we'll see. Watch this space.
I think you need to create a graphic book, because that's a great one. Just what you described is a book in itself. And I know that I know some introvert people, and even in teams and in business, you can actually help a lot of people, because I think it's one of the things I love is and that's partly one of the beautiful things about your infographics, and we're showing as we speak, and we're going to see people at least can check the links. But really, you have amazing things in terms of very practical stuff, and visual note taking, digital sketchbooks, and visual notes that you do on the iPad. But you have a lot of things that are a lot of education that goes from sustainability to ChatGPT. For instance, you have a ChatGPT infographic that is fantastic for people right now that is more on the hype. But a lot of different things like 30-day digital note taking. So let's look at this process of visual thinking.
Yeah.
You touch a bit of the career, the work with Apple, the work with this. So how do you see visual thinking for people that never thought about it? I just actually recently I interviewed a fantastic personality in UI UX. He's actually one of the biggest experts in UI UX in the world, and he worked in engineer for Hollywood, and now he's building AI chatbots. And one of the things we discussed is there's the front end and the back end, and the front end is the way we build technology. But what you do is that you create a digital narrative to understand technology, to understand education, and even thinking. And this is really important, because I think one of the things in terms of education is, first of all, understanding complex subjects in simple. First, I'm a completely addict to graphic books, and I draw a lot as well, although that is probably not as well known as my professional career as CEO. But one of the things that I love is this kind of synthesizing big amounts of information and put it in visual thinking. And definitely, I want to see your book, so about the introspectives. But let's look at how you see visual thinking, and as well creating digital thinking through your process.
Yeah, it's so interesting actually, because the whole concept of visual notes to help individuals kind of goes back quite a long way actually, and it came about through my son actually. So he was in middle school at the time, and he was struggling, really struggling in middle school, cognitively, and just not doing very well in a test. And I remember that one week he got his test back in science, and it was like a 28 or 31 or something percent. And you know, and we were just so like, what can we do to help? So I thought I'd sit down with him and work on a kind of a, you know, a visual together, just to see whether that might help him. I'd always felt that he was quite similar to me in the way that he learns, and I vividly remember, like yesterday, working on this sketch note together, to bring together the information and the visuals and to capture that concept he was learning. And so that week he had another test and he got 81%. And so, and so he said that the visuals just helped him to remember. And so from that, I mean, it was such a poignant moment for me, you know, for someone who's been teaching so long, saying like visuals matter. It was like a, you know, a real wake up moment. And so I started to research more into visuals and the brain. And as you said in your introduction, my whole master's thesis was about the impact of visuals on memory and learning. And through that thesis, I started to work with students. And the more I listened to them speak, the more I heard that they just didn't have effective learning strategies. They had to remember so much information the higher up the school they went. And so I worked on a little online course with them about visual strategies for learning. And when the data came back, or when I started going through all their responses and interviewing them, it really made a difference to so many students. Often certain types of learners would have a stronger impact on them. But what was also interesting, it had a real impact on their confidence and well-being as well. And that's something that's always been really important to me about the well-being of students and people around me. And so that was quite a driving force really into into what I was doing. And, I'd had that inkling in myself that if these drawings and these sketch notes were working for me, why wouldn't they work for other people? But so often people have that classic statement, well, I can't draw, it's going to look so ugly. And I suppose you look at that as well, who's the note for? If it's for a big, huge audience, of course you want to make it look nice, whatever nice means. You want to make it look clear and easily understood. But if the notes and the information is for yourself, whether it's to remember for a test or you wanted to just capture the whole thoughts from a book or film or something, then it doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be functional. I think that's quite an interesting dilemma, perhaps we could call it, of how people sit when it comes to visual note taking themselves, and when they look at other people's notes. I can't do that. I can't make it look like Nicki does, but it doesn't have to. That's just my way. And what other people do is equally as helpful and as effective.
It's beautiful, and I think you touched a couple of very important points, especially the visual education, because at the moment, so one of the things, if you look at probably the biggest educator in the world for good and sometimes not so much for good, is YouTube. And YouTube, and of course you mentioned Twitter, there's Instagram, there's Flickr. They are highly visual platforms, and they are the biggest platforms in the world. So a lot of people are searching when they want to learn, they go to YouTube. And this is actually a challenge that we have, for instance, as a father as well. I feel exactly what you said about for instance, some children are better reading, others have visual thinking or visual memory. So from your master, because you study these things, and as well for your experience as educator, how can we tackle this? Because this is a big problem, because the technology is becoming much more advanced. And at the same time, now, especially with the iteration of AI, we are much more, is the way we use AI. And for instance, that's at the moment, it's a big question that I want to touch, because you are as well a thought leader on these areas, and I think in a lot of other areas. But one of the things that I'm particularly excited, and that's why I wanted to interview, is that so when we try, even in the team of business, and my YouTube channel, of course, is a lot about business and technology, is that it's difficult sometimes to pass a concept, an idea. If you are a CEO, or if you are a visionary that wants to try to do another thing, or even if you just want to do something, because most of people don't understand technology, let's put it that way. And they have actually sometimes, not only they don't understand, they struggle to understand, and they feel shamed, or they feel, okay, no, I don't know this, it's stupid that I'm asking these questions. And at the same time, the technology is becoming so mature that especially just generative AI is thinking higher than humans, because it doesn't need the memory processing, so it can actually go and pick an information, get it, and just use the processing of thinking in the generative way. So how do you see this, especially right now? Because this is a big challenge, because the universities are not teaching at all anything digital. Whereas if you look at all the people that I know in universities, and I've been teaching universities for over 10 years, the digital teaching is limited almost to zero, and in some cases scary. And in the end of the day, even the children that are asked to use a computer in the school, some schools have a bit of that, but most of the schools don't have it. So there's a bit of a paradox. In one end, they end up actually spending all the time digital, and at the end, they don't have any education on this. And then there's the other paradox, that is the technology is becoming more advanced almost than us humans. And at the same time, the challenge that there's a sense of digital obesity. That is a concept from Gerd Leonard that I interviewed here in the podcast, a futurist and a fantastic personality and mind. But this digital obesity is creating another layer, because people don't feel, okay, I'll just sit like we used to sit in the past, listen to television, I'll sit on a YouTube, and I become a bit of a zombie, or in social media. So I'm on TikTok right now and so forth. So how do you look at this from your expertise, and as well from the two hats, both as a visual thinker and as an educator?
Oh my gosh, that's such a complex situation, isn't it? I mean, when you what was it, digital obesity? I've not heard that phrase before. I think that's absolutely amazing, because it's true. We're a lot of what we do is passive consuming. And I think obviously from a visual perspective, that we see and absorb so much visuals and visual information every day. So I guess for me as an educator, visual communication is a vital skill in today's world, as is literacy in general for all sorts of aspects. I was looking at something the other day from the World Economic Forum, and I remember using in a presentation the skills for 2020, and that's when creativity was right towards the top. But then the next that they produced was the future skills for 2025, and it's 2023 already. It's getting closer to that. And what was interesting is that thinking skills were right up at the top. In fact, analytical thinking, innovation, learning skills, problem solving, critical thinking, all of those were in the top, the top 5 of that top skills required for 2025. So there was a lot of discussion about how people are going to need to relearn or learn different approaches. And it did make me think a little bit about how, as an educator, I always think, how is what I'm teaching preparing students for life beyond school, life beyond university? Rather than teaching the content and then they pass the exam and then they get to university, they build up another load of content and then they go on to work. We need to be thinking more about what do they need for life, like life skills. And I'm not saying that sketchnotes is a vital skill, but just that whole concept of listening and thinking about what is the most important points of what I'm hearing, extracting that information, synchronizing those key points, and then being able to retell that information or reshare it or recall it in in a follow-up time. And all of those things are kind of all circulated around neuroscience and particularly retrieval practice. And it's often, like you said, not taught in schools. So this is something I'm trying to change through NiH Consultancy. The consultancy is, I often say I'm a bit like an octopus. I have many aspects of me. I used to joke in the classroom that I used to say to students, oh, I wish I was an octopus and I could deal with lots of people at the same time. And that hilarity has always stuck with me, that when I started to think, well, what could I do beyond teaching? And I came up with so many different things, like the visual note taking, working with students on their learning strategies, talking to schools about embedding retrieval practice. There were so many aspects of things that I wanted to, and introversy. And so one of those aspects is looking at how retrieval practice can be integrated, but also how visuals and retrieval practice can work together. And that really stemmed from the thesis that I wrote. And it kind of goes back to, in the 1970s, there was a psychologist called Alan Pavio, and he talks about dual coding, this idea of visuals and text, and how those two channels can be two ways to learn. And so I look at sketchnotes and visual note taking and mind maps and flow charts and things like that as a process of dual coding. Where the visuals act as a kind of a cue for our brain to then recall that information when it needs to, whether that's in a couple of days or a couple of weeks or a long time down the road. And so in some ways, going back to visual literacy, there's a risk when you do a visual note or an infographic of having too many images. And so again, our working memory will be overloaded. It's not clear to see what's the message. But then on the other side, there's that balance of, you might have too few. So we might not understand what it's about, or we might not capture all the details. So it's quite a tricky thing to do, actually, and even more difficult during a lesson live or in a meeting or a presentation. I always marvel at graphic facilitators, how incredible their listening skills must be to be able to be right in the moment, capturing visually all of those conversations and information that comes at them. For me, I prefer to listen, to make some notes, come back to the visual notes that I've made, and then think about the big picture or the structure, and then put the information into that. But that's just my process of working.
No, I love that. So you touch visual thinking. So let's look between visual thinking or visual literacy and digital literacy. So how do you look at the two concepts? Because you are as well part of that, and I think these two concepts are critical for creating a better society. Let's put it that way, because this can avoid a lot of. Because one of the things, and it's a big question again, but one of the things that scares me is if you look at all the extremes that are happening in our society. Normally, they tend to exist because people don't understand something, and then they try to get one narrative, which is a way of thinking that solves the problem for them, so they don't need to think. And this is actually, it happens in all societies in history of humanity. Actually, Yuval Harari, Noah Harari mentions this in his book. Actually, he transformed his Sapiens in, I bought actually all the books in graphic novels, and it's fantastic. But this kind of capacity of making the visual thinking with the digital literacy or the visual literacy, which is digital as well, is a key concept, but it's a very difficult one because the schools are not prepared. And as well, even what you're talking here for us is completely normal, I think, for you and me. But if you take this outside, it's probably cutting edge. Okay, I never thought about it. Probably that's what most of the people think about it. But this is the key element for us to understand our world, and as well to somehow solve a lot of problems of, like you said, people that have, for instance, difficulty in reading. If they have visual thinking, they can actually think in another way. That doesn't mean they're not intelligent. For instance, I have one of my partners, which is on my board, that he actually was diagnosed with, well, actually was not diagnosed because in school people never told him, but he could not read a book. Okay, and because of that, he felt always inferior, and actually he's a very successful business person. But this is just an example of someone that was partly, and for instance, even Sir Richard Branson, he mentioned that he, yeah, that I forgot right now the technical term, but you know what I mean. So these things are really important, but they can change the entire society and the perception. So I would like to hear about this area. Sorry, it's always big questions, but it's a brainstorm as well.
It's a huge question. Oh my goodness, I could talk for hours about digital literacy, visual literacy, just literacy in general. And I think schools are getting better. Well, certainly in the international sector, they're getting better at talking through digital literacy, mostly because the students have a device all the time. And most of their lessons, if not all of their lessons, are using that digital device. And so teaching, I don't know whether it's digital literacy or more like digital safety, and that balance between how much you're using, what you're using, how you interpret information, how you research. A lot of that has to come through life skills or PSE or whatever they call it in school these days, and also through the teachers. You know, if I'm researching or trying to teach the students how to research in my class, I'm not going to say, hey, just open up your computers and go and find this. I will model what it looks like to research for a particular thing. And it's interesting you mentioned about AI. So many teachers are like terrified of AI, and yet it's just amazing. And what it does, if you sit, like I've done recently, sit side by side with a student, and they're struggling with finding information or thinking through things, you can use AI as a thought partner. One of my colleagues recently called it like a thought partner, and I thought that's exactly right. So you sit with this student, and the student has this thought partner to ask questions. And at the start, you're so bad at asking questions. You just ask ridiculously simple things. And then as you notice what AI throws back at you and you think, no, that's not what I mean at all, you get better at crafting those questions. And I think that's a skill that starts or is starting to come through lessons now, that teaching students, one, how to research, two, how to ask good questions, and then also that whole literacy on how to check whether something's right, whether something's accurate, because that's obviously a huge contention with generative AI, that how do you know if it's correct? So recently a student was looking up some information about an artist, and particularly a fashion designer. And the information came back and we both looked at each other and said, really, is that true? So we would then take that information and go and search for it. And we found out that actually it was incorrect and fed that back into ChatGPT and said, actually, this is not correct. And it was quite an interesting moment between the student, me, the teacher, and the computer. And for them to realize that they could actually teach the AI as well. So I don't know if that's even touched upon the questions that you asked, but it's
No,
always
it's
quite an
amazing.
interesting point. It's different forms of literacy and how we learn. It's a crucial thing in today's world.
So fantastic, and really is a key element. So let's touch more about the interaction between, for instance, your work and your students, or even your consultancy. So can you tell us some case studies? Because I think one of the things I always like to do is go from the theory to the practice. Although we talk about very complex things, the practice is always better. So, for instance, a case study with students, like you just mentioned, the interaction with ChatGPT, and of course, ChatGPT is fantastic, but it has a lot of limitations, which is normal in any technology. But as well with your consultancy, because I think it's important for people to understand how important this is. Because, for instance, when you start a big business, a big project, for instance, if you have a client, even sometimes millions of dollars, or the government, you have to start cutting the things in pieces and putting visualization, the whiteboard, which I think a lot of your work is a whiteboard, interactive of ideas and learning, and beautiful drawings and infographics. So some case studies that you can show with our audience that I think is interesting to see this.
Yeah, I mean, the company is only in its infancy, but it's kind of been brewing in the back of my head for some time, particularly with sketchnotes. And so one of the things that I'm currently working on is a series of courses that people can take in their own time if they want to learn how to sketchnote. Basic information on how to extract information, how to sort that information, and how to visualize. So working on little icons, little drawings, but also how to map information through flowcharts or concept mapping. And so that's one aspect of it, with courses that people can go on. But also there's the one-to-one, that I love to work one-to-one with people. Now I say one-to-one, meaning like one person next to me. That's obviously ideal. And so I've worked with quite a lot of students recently on learning strategies, analytical writing, lots of things to do with different aspects of my experience, but also sitting down and working with people on sketchnotes. Now that's not so possible these days because of I'd be just stuck with Singapore, but thank you to the pandemic, we're so much more open and you're comfortable with this kind of interaction online through Zoom or whatever. And so some of the ways that I can teach sketchnotes can be through a live session, where I have the camera above looking down at what I'm doing and working with a group of people, but also traveling to different schools to work with teachers, or working with different organizations to help businesses think things through. So whether that's they might have come across a problem that they want to discuss with different areas of their company, or they might be going through change and they want to sort of map out what that thinking and that vision might look like. So there's lots of different ways that I can work one-to-one with individuals, online or in person, but also with groups of people as well. And then the other aspect is the practical sketch notes, where I can make a sketch note on something that's, for example, one of your amazing interviews that you've done. I've just watched the one with Carolina, the art curator, and as I was listening to her, there's so much beautiful things that she said, as is the case with so many podcasts you listen to and videos you watch or books that you read, and to be able to take that information and put it into a visual, as a kind of a gift, isn't it, for the person, that they can see what they've been saying and how it comes across, like what parts do you take out that are most important and what areas might connect with an audience. So that's the other aspect of the work that I do, making sketch notes or visual thinking to represent some aspects of people's work.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and I love the way you put the different pieces of the puzzle, because effectively is a bit about coaching, is about understanding visual notes and different things. So for people that are listening to us, and we're finishing 1 hour, which has been passing very fast. So I want to go through a couple of things in terms of your own art, because I think that's the beauty about this. And so from the different things you've been doing, for instance, for people listening to us, you can find on Flickr, you can find on Nicki website, you can find in multiple places under Twitter and so forth. There's fantastic things. So so from these things that you've been doing, I don't know if you want to highlight one or two. You mentioned in the beginning one or two things, like for instance, right now the introvert, a couple of different things. I mentioned the chat GPT infographic, but so is there a series of topics that are more interested? Because I know that you do a lot of things as a sketch, as a way of learning, brainstorming, but is it a kind of a common motive that you've been doing and building around your visual trajectory and portfolio as well?
That's such a great question. I suppose because I was in education for 31 years, I'm naturally drawn to things that I feel are important to my values or the values of the schools that I've worked in. So I think that that note that I did about inclusivity was really important. And in today's world, um, educating people through a visual note to encourage them to find out more is really important to me. Again, a lot of people that I connected with that do amazing things are again connected with education. So I suppose education is like the first point of call. So the chat GPT, the inclusivity, the introverts, that's a lot of things that I've connected to. So my passions, my things that I stumble on Twitter, whatever. But I think you learn so much when making a visual note. Because you're so engrossed with the information and filtering out and synchronizing the information, you learn so much about it. And I think because I'm a deep thinker, I would then research and go deeper into what the subject is. So even though I'm an introvert myself, I would go and research, like, what does this mean to other people? How does this affect their daily life? What does that mean for a presenter or a celebrity or a student in the classroom? So I will look into gathering lots of information about whatever that topic is, and then that would allow me to be more knowledgeable in the way that I present the visuals and the information together. So there's no limit to what I could do a visual note on, unless I couldn't think of a visual that works for it. But I've never failed that yet. There's always been something that's come up.
Wonderful, and that's very special as well. So to finish, I want to probably share the screen right now, though my team will organize better. But one of the things that I love, and actually I met you through this infographic, but I think this infographic summarizes a lot of the things we've been talking here. and I would like somehow to show it to our audience, but as well to go through that with you. So it's one that summarizes probably the interview we've been having. Let me see if I can put it in a bigger screen capacity for us to have. So I'll share, and if the team give me sharing access. So I'll be very fast here. So let's go through this infographic with you, and of course the team will organize better. But so this is visual literacy and big data infographic, and how to infuse into the classroom, how to communicate this. So can you guide us through this infographic, which I think is a great way to summarize this interview, and there's a lot of other things that I would like to do. Probably do a second round with other people and talking about some of the ideas, but I think this is a great one that can summarize literally almost everything we discussed today.
Well, you know, of course, the best person to speak about this would be the lovely Kelly Grogan. And this is so funny, Dinis, because this was, I am not kidding you, one of the very first sketch notes that I did live in a presentation that Kelly was doing at a conference. It was honestly one of the first ones that I did. So when you shared it on Twitter, I was quite, I don't know if the word embarrassed is the word, because it's definitely not one of my most beautiful. And I know I've said that it doesn't have to be pretty and that it doesn't have to be beautiful, but in terms of structure, it's a disaster. But what's
now you have beautiful ones,
it is.
but the reason
I've
I
learned
choose
so
this
much.
one, the reason I choose this one is because, like you said, it's from Kelly, but I love that it's so simple at the same time, because sometimes people overcomplicate. But I'll continue.
True. And I suppose there are little, it's quite funny looking back at it and the things that I've just talked about and the things that I'm doing now, because just seeing the fact that I had this eye, that's the same concept that I was talking about an image that captures what the overall sort of big idea is about. So the idea of, you know, visual literacy, but also data, and data being communicated more visually, was tied into that eye at the top. And the concept of infographics being that combination of data and visuals together. And so Kelly was running this workshop, and it's quite difficult to draw and listen and to participate in a workshop all at the same time. And I was desperate to sort of, you know, give this gift back to her as a presenter. But what she showed, I mean, it's quite a sort of a famous TED talk by David McCandless on Data is Beautiful. And so she talked a lot about how data can be visualized and shown. I mean, this is years ago, so I'm really working on my visual memory to trigger what it was she was talking about at the time. And it's quite a test on my ability at the time to have captured the main points there. You know, there's even a little bit just on that right hand side where it talks about the principles of design, known as CRAP, which is basically an acronym for color, repetition, proximity, and alignment. And it's quite a memorable acronym in the design world. For the life of me, I can't remember who it was that came up with that. I think it was, I can't remember, maybe Robin Williams, something like that, but not the comedian Robin Williams, but a presenter on that. So I'm looking back at this and thinking, well, what was the point of what she was presenting about? And it was about how can we bring this idea back into the classroom? So this is maybe 5 or more years ago. So things have changed quite drastically, but a lot of what's on that sketch note is still important today, and perhaps not even used in today. You know, you were talking about schools who perhaps are not helping students as well as they might. So again, a lot of this that's in front of us could be utilized even today.
No, and I love. I think we talk here about visual for people listening to us. There's visual literacy, big data infographic, but in the end of the day, you have this concept of the crap that is repetition, proximity, color, and alignment. And I think it's wonderful. It's so simple but wonderful. And as well, the idea of cross-curricular, how to use online, students as expert, because it can be for everyone. I think one of the things I was looking at the book recently, From the Age of Invisible Machines, from Robert actually in front of me, Robert Wilson Tyson, and Robert, and one of the things that I was really excited is they're really, at the moment, we are digital workers, everyone in business or in economy and education. And the thing is that this digital part comes with our eyes, the way we interact with each other. It might be in Zoom or in YouTube or whatever it is, but this part is really important. So it's been a magic moment. I want to thank you. I think we passed 1 hour, and I want to be respectful of your time as well. I'm sure I definitely want to come to a round 2 where we're going probably I want to get a couple of visual thinkers to talk about these things and involve eventually someone from universities. But I want to thank you, Nicki, for your inspiration and the great ideas, and as well for making the world a bit more inspirational and more, I would say, more beautiful with all these things.
Oh, that's so kind of you. Thank you. And I suppose we could add on to that and making the world a little bit more visual as well.
Yes.
We can't avoid it. It's everywhere.
Yes, completely. So we'll put all the links for people listening to us, all the websites of Nicki, all the different places where you can find her information. And please engage with her, and even companies listening to us or other people that want to learn, please engage, because she is a fantastic artist and creator and visual thinker, and as well coacher, I would say, like that. Thank you, Nicki, and wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.